So often, when searching for Stolitz in the internet, I always find people talking about how toxic it is and how it pulled the show down by becoming the main plot focus. I won't argue with those takes because I do agree with them for the most part, but what's fascinating about Stolitz to me is that it is layers and layers of complexity that I don't think I can trade back for the earlier episodes' more dart-in-the-wall and wacky hijinks. Liking Helluva Boss isn't something you just say outright without expecting some weird looks your way. Especially if your favorite ship just so happens to be this dramatic, horny, star-crossed lovers ship. Stolitz is problematic as heck. And yet, we can't deny how popular it is within the fandom. People ship them for surprisingly wholesome reasons. You'll find that a lot of the fanart surrounding Stolitz is just them being cute together. Either that, or it's angst. What started out as a transactional and downright exploitative relationship did turn out to have a more wholesome future in just a matter of 3 episodes. Which is wild because it took them 5 years of slow burn, just to finally wrap the process in the remaining episodes of Season 2. We started out with a powerful rich bitch, letting a bunch of assassins roam freely on Earth, to a soap opera that, honestly, I think ended up benefiting the show complicatedly than I expected. I rewatched the show with a friend recently, and I must say, despite Season 2 being very flawed compared to the first season, it is a lot more fascinating at what it has to offer. As it turns out, there's more to these characters than just cartoonishly funny stories, even if it may appear fanficky to a lot of people now. But fanfiction is never really a bad thing that people like to play it out as, with a lot of great writers having started out writing fanfics or making deviant art OCs. And trying to have 2 traumatized people to just be happy together. That's just not a bad thing at all. Stolitz has an undeniable spark, even if it's laced with miscommunication and insecurity. It thrives on an opposites attract contrasts that fandoms are a sucker for. That's why we're so hooked. So how did we get here? I think it's pretty obvious from the get-go that Stolitz is codependent in the sense that both Blitz and Stolas admit they can barely function or live without each other.
I would rather be dead. I can live life without you by my side.
It's not akin to Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding or anything of that sort, even with its exploitative nature and poor communication, since Blitz and Stolas have consented to the terms of their relationship. It's arguable that Blitz felt forced to do whatever was needed for the affair, because he was in the middle of running away from getting shot. But he did seem to have given Stolas his phone number, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to call from his bath. It's also arguable that Stolas was manipulated into this transaction and handled it in the worst way possible. Blitz hasn't expressed any disdain for the affair itself. He does like the idea of having fun with Stolas every full moon. Hell, he only feels manipulated after Stolas tries to call the transaction off. The issue and the nature of their agreement is quite frankly all pinned on Stolas. He was the one who initiated the transaction to begin with, only to get upset that he ended up wanting something more. I was heavily critical of Stolas for most of Season 2 for the very reason that he would claim to make a change, and yet still find ways to scoot out of his predicament. The guy has a safety net of wealth and privilege that Blitz does not, and is completely oblivious to how much of that is powerful and how said net protects him. He spends most of his time wallowing in romantic fantasies and being so consumed by them that he becomes really irresponsible. I believe the reason why he irresponsibly proposed an affair with Blitz to begin with instead of a date is because Stolas himself is also only familiar with transactional relationships. He was arranged to marry Stella to produce an heir rather than building a relationship organically after all. Octavia, for the most part, has always been an afterthought for Stolas. It's not a wonder why she's always upset with him. I know a lot of people are angry at Octavia's characterization in Sinsmas, but given how Stolas has ignored her for more than 3 times already and only listens to her after she does something drastic, should really spell out how valid her feelings are. And because feelings don't need to make sense to other people to be valid. Their messages our bodies are telling us that something is wrong. We don't necessarily have to agree with those feelings in order to validate or try to understand them. In another case of irresponsibility, Blitz, who Stolas has only met once at that point, steals the Grimoire, a powerful, space-warping family heirloom that should not be placed into the wrong hands. And Stolas is like,
Oh, so you're a kinky little imp, are you? Do you like it when I talk to you dirty? I want you to me with your in. Get it all the way through me, you.
Blitz was the equivalent of a stranger, and Stolas flat out decided he'd throw everything out the window then and there just to chase his romantic whimsies. Everything hinged on Blitz after that. Stolas doesn't do anything else outside of moping and depression and only lights up whenever Blitz is involved. He didn't divorce Stala for a while despite proudly waving on it because he wanted to maintain the appearance of a decent royal family while seeking comfort elsewhere. If the texts in the Western energy were indicative of anything, it's that Stolas avoided committing anything with Blitz, while still craving for romantic affection that one would only receive in a committed relationship. He wanted to reap the benefits of a relationship without actually doing his part to earn said benefits. An affair allowed him to experience the passion and excitement of a relationship without the pressure of commitment. In turn, he was matching Blitz's energy of a one-night stand and mistook it for something genuine. While he does eventually come to realize that what they had was hollow, Stolas was so codependent and did not have an appropriate plan for what he'd do if the narrative he had of Blitz and his head fell apart. And that is exactly what ended up happening. It's worth noting that when Stolas talks about his fantasies, he's almost always referring to an idealization of it, which is what he perceives true love to be like. And it's kind of pathetic that he imposes these fantasies on Blitz specifically. Treating someone with the idea of what you have of them in mind is different from treating someone as their own person. This is why he's so airheaded. Stolas already has his whole narrative in his head of how things should go and dismisses the reality of the situations he's in. It's why he didn't panic when Striker kidnapped him, playing it out like he'll be a damsel saved by his prince. Why when he talks about his fantasies, he refers to caricatures and the roles of the TV drama, rather than actually acknowledging how different it would look like with Blitz in the picture. And the reason why he has this narrative in the first place is, well, I think it's pretty obvious. It's escapism. To run away from the life that was arranged for him and the loveless abusive marriage he was put in, Stolas has never had any proper experience with love and does not know what it's like. Hence why his notions of what true love looks like are childish and naive. Why is he in love with Blitz in particular? Well, since the very beginning, Stolas had a fascination for imps. You can see that the plushie he favors is an imp plush. He falls for Blitz and not Fizz because Blitz had a different kind of charm to him that other people just didn't get. There was something about Blitz that had a raw, unscripted quality to him than what Stolas was used to. Later, as adults, Blitz continues to challenge what was the norm in Stolas' upper class life by simply not coddling him. Blitz represents a way for Stolas to defy Goetia norms and explore a part of himself he's repressed. Stolas considers him his very first friend even though they were set up by their parents. He's trying to look for a genuine connection in a position that discourages him. Blitz brought excitement, challenge, and an emotional connection into his otherwise stagnant life. So that begs the question, does Stolas really love Blitz or is he just enamored by the idea of him? Put a pin on that. We'll get to that later. Stolas is surrounded by other pompous, rich assholes who are content with what's put in stone for them, provided they get to live a life of lavishness. He's not that different from the rest of the Goetias in the sense that he doesn't know what things are like beyond that inherited wealth and privilege. It's why he treated Blitz like a toy without realizing how bad it was. He was oblivious to how his status would make that come across, and even more so oblivious when Blitz would express discomfort in his pet names. Stolas is often shown treating the imps around him like objects, and he doesn't even acknowledge it. The guy does not understand that being in a place of wealth is already a dream most of the lower class demons can't even achieve, and it leads to him making the most irresponsible decisions. Having power in itself means
Great responsibility.
a lot of people criticize that Stolas is put in a pedestal by the writing, that he's always framed like he's the correct person, despite always messing up. But given the description under Apology Tour, it appears the writers are well aware of Stolas' shortcomings. So why are they still writing him like this? Well, I believe it's because we are looking at the story through Blitz's eyes. It's called Helluva Boss for a reason. The boss is Blitz, it's his show, he's the protagonist. We're always looking at the setting and other characters through his eyes. What's interesting about this is that it also means a lot of his perspectives can be indicated through Stolas' leitmotif. So for those who don't know, a leitmotif is a recurring piece of music associated with a character. We know that Stolas has one given this plays whenever he is on screen.
Anywho, I have been thinking. I have been permitting you to access the mortal realm less than legally for some time now, but I do need it back to fulfill my duties. I was thinking, what if we worked out some kind of exchange?
The first time we hear the leitmotif in the first few episodes, it sounds menacing and powerful. That's the vibe Stolas gave off to Blitz from before. But by the time we hear the full leitmotif in the circus, it actually sounds tragic.
Owl in a cage, you show your age, your sweetness has run foul.
This is who Stolas actually is, and why I think the leitmotif is such a masterpiece. It paints off a very circus-level picture to us as the audience, looking through Blitz's eyes, only for that surface to get ripped off and we see just how sad Stolas really is. Blitz slowly realized that too as the show progressed. Then Mastermind happened. Coming back to the question of whether or not Stolas loves Blitz as a person or as an idea, Mastermind is what seals the deal of him loving Blitz for who he is. You don't just throw everything away for someone who you supposedly cut ties with. Stolas gained absolutely nothing by taking Blitz's spot in the court execution. Stolas' fantasies may have been selfish and out of touch, but he figured those fantasies were already long gone since the full moon episode. Yet he was going to save Blitz anyway. It's out of genuine love. In a way, Mastermind is Stolas losing wealth and power, but in return, he received the romantic whimsy he had always wanted, just not the perfect kind of whimsy he had in mind. It's a double-edged sword. Living with Blitz isn't exactly a reassuring kind of safety net, not when IMP usually have to fend for themselves and occasionally even financially struggle with how unpredictable Blitz runs the operation. Sinsmas is where things really shine with how Stolas is learning to live without his status and privilege. There are times where we can see him try to double down on his decisions, only to realize that he has no safety net to return to, unlike before.
What a fucking idiot I am! This was so stupid, I cannot believe I could be this fucking stupid, I ruined everything!
Him being unable to move IMP's desk, and then having a realization from doing that, is just the absolute cherry on top. That quite literally symbolizes how he has zero control. He barely even destroyed anything in the office. It's really satisfying to watch when we've been fed with so much of him falling back into square one just because he can. When Blitz saves his life, it was Stolas' confirmation that he was truly loved back, like he'd always wanted. Sure, his fantasies probably involved him being saved by Blitz, but Stolas had been disillusioned of those fantasies when he spent a month of seeing what reality is like with the real Blitz. There's no reason for him to chase his fantasies anymore, not after he experiences the hardships and struggles of what it's like for the lower class. It's Stolas' realization that the narrative he had in his head had a lot of flaws going on for it. He and Blitz are growing by spending more quality time together in a low-stakes environment, which are things outside of their relationship. Moreover, Stolas is now accepting and taking full responsibility for his choices instead of casting blame on Blitz like he did back in Full Moon. It's so great to see him come to his senses and let reality settle in for how it's like with poor regular folks in hell. But most importantly, in that true love, as it turns out, is not all sunshine and rainbows, yet it's still something worth fighting for. Where do they even begin with this guy? So, just to preface, Blitz's jackass, no-nonsense, anti-oppression stance is more of a facade to drown out his insecurities. Sure, he has a disdain for the upper class, constantly exploiting his kind, but he's no patriot in his treatment of other imps. Take Moxxie as a prime example. Class disparity is a safer excuse for him to make than admitting his own emotional wounds. If he can look like he doesn't give a shit, hide it behind a curtain of sarcastic wit and deflection and be able to justify it, then he'll be more likely to survive in hell. His entire character is a walking amalgamation of coping mechanisms he needed in order to get out of the rut he was in. And he knows this. What he doesn't know is how to change for the better when all he's ever had to rely on has been himself. He's been the protector, the boss, the independent one for the entirety of his life. And because he's been through so much anyway, he lies to himself that only he can really do the things that need to be done. That he doesn't need other people. At the same time, because of this mindset, he is unable to maintain relationships long-term with how he's so used to being by himself already. This especially extends to his romantic relationships, since romantic relationships typically have different sets of expectations and bring up more vulnerability. It's why he can be so openly affectionate to Luna, because he sees himself in her, but hostile to Stolas, because he can get possibly rejected and because he knows the transaction is inherently imbalanced. Granted, Luna does put up an act of defiance around him, but Blitz takes this as an opportunity to love her even more, while Stolas' advances only make him roll his eyes. He would make bitier marks to keep his side of the line in control. The transactional affair he has with Stolas is analogous to how his mind works. He doesn't know what genuine platonic intimacy can look like outside of family. He's always felt like fucking his friends because sex is a give and take type of thing that doesn't require him to open up emotionally. Blitz assumes that people only value him for what he can physically provide. Transactions have been his way of life, having been born into child labor within the circus. Love is something that he learned he had to earn. One consequence of being alone for so long is that you start to crave attention due to how deprived you are of it. And Blitz has an odd cognitive dissonance with that. Blitz back in his childhood was already looking for validation among his peers, still being mostly a loner given how Fizz was the main attraction. And though it's usually a toxic sentiment among workplaces in real life to claim that they are a family, for Blitz's case, he means it sincerely. IMP is his found family. It's where he can get the attention he lost in his former family. That's also why IMP is a type of business specifically, because Blitz has only ever been familiar of families running as businesses. The fire incident that killed his mother fueled him to be even more alone when he starts to think anyone close to him only gets hurt. He's supposed to be the protector, so it only makes the cognitive dissonance worse. While I don't think he actually believes in the jackass insults he says to other people, those insults still do come from a place of insecurity he projects onto. It's implied that he was disowned and didn't have a proper education at that point, hence why he casually bullies Moxxie with how he feels dumber than him in comparison. When he tells off Stolas and Vrosica that he couldn't be tied down into a committed relationship, it's because he believes he's unlovable whilst trying to use that kind of insult as a wall to protect his ego. Once Vrosica expressed loving him genuinely, Blitz sabotaged that relationship so he didn't have to confront feeling unworthy of her love. It made him feel exposed. In turn, he won't get hurt as much if it's him who gets to end the relationship on his terms. Even if that meant hurting Veronica instead. He could villainize her and won't have to confront his own shortcomings. It's the kind of lie he could sell himself with, even if it only worsens his cognitive dissonance of how bad he actually is. It's preemptive abandonment. Blitz is even in denial of it with the I hate Blitzo party Veronica throws, and would rather villainize everyone else in that room or rationalize his behavior than confront his destructive tendencies. For his case with Stolas, however, Blitz couldn't sabotage the transaction outright since he needed the book. So he kept Stolas at an arm's length, refusing to let himself be vulnerable. Unlike with Veronica, he couldn't turn away entirely, suggesting that part of him wants the connection but has been too afraid to fully embrace it. Blitz's experience with the rest of the upper class as an imp gives him a reason to be in denial of Stolas' feelings for him. It's hard for him to accept anything else beyond that. Though I'm not sure how Blitz feels about the upper class after his experience with Stolas. From what I can tell, he probably seems to think Stolas is the exception. But anyway. That's why he was trying his best to underthink the full moon situation and not have to grapple how unimportant he feels he is to Stolas. Because he was already wary of feeling like Stolas was losing interest in him, Blitz figures that by trying to prove his value again in their affair would help things. So of course his knee-jerk reaction to Stolas' confession was to stick to his guns and play it kinky. He misreads Stolas walking away as a confirmation of the worst possibility that he had no value, only to be then retorted back that that assumption is wrong. All of this can be accumulated to Blitz preemptively shielding himself from possible rejection, so he does the rejecting and criticism instead when the opportunity presents itself. He doesn't have enough trust in other people or himself to not abandon him. Criticism for Blitz's character among the fandom tends to be about his trauma not being an excuse for the way he treats the rest of the crew, particularly Moxxie and even Millie. It's intended to not be fun to watch, but I can still see why people would prefer to opt out of the show because of that. It's an intentional character flaw the writer sets up that I believe Blitz will come around to toning down on later. Like him respecting Moxxie's wishes and Sinsmas will start. But for the longest time, he barely had any respect for people because he doesn't even respect himself. Sure, Millie says he respects her, but it's more because he respects her skills and talent. She's not referring to when he stalks her and Moxxie around. In fact, him respecting her as a top-tier assassin and giving them better lives is why she puts up with him in the first place, even at his worst tendencies. The funny thing is that Blitz gave them better things in life, and those are still things he couldn't reach. He stalks them and Dems because they have something that he doesn't, and that makes him a little jealous. He's just too emotionally fragile to admit it. Blitz's moping and throwing pity parties at himself are all just ways of him trying to cope with his bruised pride. The whole woe is me thing is a compensation for things he feels inferior about or feels like is missing, such as love. It doesn't really change that it's still all about him, however, and we've already seen how it becomes a detriment to the rest of the crew. Millie was right to snap at him and retort how he's not the only one with problems. But despite holding him accountable, she understands that being supportive would be more fruitful rather than trying to push him down even more than he already was. All of this makes me wonder how Blitz's dynamic with everyone else can grow or change the more he realizes how vulnerability isn't a sign of weakness. He'd probably no longer belittle Moxxie. Blitz needs to learn how to acknowledge his value and worth without anyone else telling him. And he needs to understand doing that doesn't mean he needs to put down others just to feel big. We see how much Blitz is actually loved by the rest of the gang after almost losing each other in the trial. I'm hoping this makes him realize how much he affects other people in a good way, but also makes him more careful of his treatment with the crew. Stolas is especially persistent in caring about Blitz to the point that his affection is only sincerely reciprocated once they hit a life or death situation. Coming back to the family structure that Blitz starts to recreate with IMP, all three of them embody aspects of Blitz's insecurities. Moxxie represents the intelligence and upbringing Blitz feels he lacks. Millie embodies the emotional stability Blitz needs to grow, and Luna reflects his inner child. damaged but fiercely independent. Stolas, having joined IMP, serves as his mirror and confronting his insecurities regarding vulnerability. Despite both of them coming from very different backgrounds, they're two sides of the same coin. The funny thing about all of this, however, is that for his affair with Stolas, Blitz is not the one who needs to set aside his ego like he tries to do an apology tour. Now I say tries because we all know he never internalized this lesson when Ghostfuckers came around. It's pretty obvious that Blitz is the one being exploited in their affair, but what he does need to apologize for is manipulating Stolas into bed so he could steal the grimoire. That was his own exploitation, they were using each other. Stolas using Blitz to escape from his life, and Blitz using Stolas for the grimoire. And Blitz still hasn't apologized about this in the series yet. He was sorry in Apology Tour for rejecting Stolas but not sorry for the book. I'm hoping the series addresses this later as they work on the relationship. What's really ironic is that Stolas accused Blitz of being the airhead to his hints of affection, when in reality Stolas himself is the airhead who didn't understand his actions were unwarranted. But while that may be obvious to us as the audience, for Blitz, he thinks he's the asshole for not returning those advances. It was his one chance at love and he feels like he shot it down. He has a very skewed perception of himself compared to what we see as viewers, and that's why he thinks he needed to be the one to set his ego aside and apologize. What makes me wonder about this is that despite Blitz being spiteful and refusing to apologize at first, it's constantly on the back of his mind. It gives a bit of a picture as to why he didn't feel the same way for Veronica for a long time. It might be that Blitz internalized what Stolas said about him, while he didn't even give Veronica a chance to speak for herself in their breakup. I imagine he left without giving her a moment to say anything so he had control in the conversation. Sounds familiar, right?
Goodbye, Blitz. Stolitz, wait! What the fuck?
That's exactly the stunt Stolas pulled on Blitz on the full moon. Stolas controlled that conversation and never gave Blitz the proper chance to process what was going on. This led to Blitz internalizing what Stolas said. Veronica, on the other hand, also internalized Blitz leaving her, but just like Blitz's reaction to Stolas, she's angry about feeling like she was the bad guy when she wasn't. Blitz in his scenario with Stolas is not the wrong one either, but he doesn't have the self-esteem to realize that, unlike Veronica. Or maybe I'm just spitballing. I don't know, maybe that's what happened, maybe not. But the moment Blitz and Veronica have their own talk is when he officially apologizes to her, having finally taken in what she said and what he did being horrible. Stolas needs to have this kind of realization for Blitz as well. There comes a point that when you think you're so unlovable, you also think that no one should care or be with you to begin with. Like in your head, it doesn't make sense for anyone to want to hang around someone as awful as you. Aside from Brandon Rogers not being much of a singer, I think the reason why Blitz doesn't really sing in the show is because he has a disconnect with the other characters in general thanks to this belief. The one time he is seen singing is when he's by himself, in a disconnected kind of duet with Stolas. He felt like he needed to play a role to keep Stolas interested in their exchange. For Blitz, that was just the way things were, and it shook him when Stolas challenged that belief. When both of them start singing a soliloquy in Mastermind, it isn't disconnected as they form the better understanding of each other. Stolas is putting up the rich, pompous front, and Blitz can see right through that front when he had it before. Stolas saves his life in Mastermind despite them supposedly parting ways, right in front of Blitz, forcing him to face his contradictions and lowering away his beliefs of being unlovable by committing the ultimate act of sacrifice out of love. It's poetic.
Out for love, love. Think of who you care about. Protect them and be out for.
One large elephant in the room that people always bring up when it comes to Stolitz is the power imbalance that they had in earlier episodes. But then you compare that to Fizz and Asmodeus or B and Vortex, who are somehow pretty fine in their relationships despite the massive power gap in their hierarchies. And that's because the characters in these pairings are able to accept things outside of their control. Asmodeus admits that he loves and dates an imp despite it affecting his status, and while Fitz is insecure of himself, Asmodeus tells him he's already amazing the way he is, and he doesn't need to compensate to be anything more, and that his worth isn't intrinsically tied to status of stardom, Mammon's pressures, or being an imp. Fizz has had overwhelming support and received unconditional love from Asmodeus for years, while Blitz had nobody after the fire. So Blitz came out more emotionally unstable as a result. Bea, on the other hand, just does not seem to care about dating someone of the lower class whatsoever. Her easygoing attitude combined with Vortex's nonchalance make the hierarchy irrelevant. Fizz with Asmodeus or Bea with Vortex all have trust in each other enough not to need control in order to feel safe and happy in their relationships, despite the hierarchical gaps, which is something Stolas hasn't had until Sinsmas, and is especially egregious in Aussies and the full moon. Fundamentally, the class disparity in Helluva Boss is a front for both Blitz and Stolas. Blitz typically uses it to justify why he can't be with Stolas, but we know deep down it's more because he just sees himself as inferior to anyone regardless of status or power. While the power gap does play a big role in their relationship, most of Stolitz's problems are self-imposed thanks to feelings of helplessness or inferiority. This isn't helped by the fact that Stolas' failure to defend Blitz at Aussies wasn't just a missed opportunity to stand up for him. It unintentionally validated Blitz's deepest fear, that he's nothing more than a plaything. Stolas likely didn't realize the depth of Blitz's insecurities as he's consumed by his own feelings of helplessness and guilt. This lack of awareness on Stolas' part creates a feedback loop where both him and Blitz fail to address the other's emotional needs. They were both trying to maintain what little control they had over the situation when they were both being humiliated at the club. To compensate, they both resorted to wallowing in self-destructive habits. It's not good for them to be drinking or wasting away, but doing those things gives them a messed up sense of reclaiming agency and control. Like they at least feel in charge of screwing themselves over and not have to think about what's happened or how powerless they feel. If they can punish themselves, it spares them the pain of someone else hurting them. Then they decide to ignore it altogether and seeing stars as it's the easy way out, and finding Octavia was more important. Stolas and Blitz shared a mutual fear of what might happen if they fully open up to each other. Not even Stolas almost getting assassinated was enough to make a breaking point for either of them. They kept ignoring the cracks in their relationship until Stolas scraped together the spine to set a proper meetup date. Their struggles with control and vulnerability create a tragic irony. Both desperately want connection, but fear the risks that come with it. When Stolas gives Blitz the Asmodean crystal, he's trusting not Blitz, but the idea of what they could be after. When that doesn't happen, he walks out while Blitz lashes out in return to take whatever remnants of control he could have in the conversation. It was all about control, that's where the event turned out to be a disaster. The very nature of their relationship has been them fighting to take control of certain aspects of their life, with Stolas' escapism being him coping with the lack of control he has in his loveless marriage, to Blitz pushing away anyone who loves him so he can remain in control of what's going on. I feel like their shared sense of helplessness is what even draws Blitz to Stolas' drunk explanation of his romantic fantasies and apology tour. Hell, the transactional affair itself is Stolas exerting control of Blitz's livelihood that essentially created the codependence they had. The Asmodean crystal is pretty symbolic in their relationship. For Stolas, it was the key to liberating Blitz, but we know that he really just wanted that night to have turned out like his fantasies. For Blitz, it was a testament to how selfish he was as a partner. The crystal doesn't respond to him when he does a shoddy job of being affectionate to it after all. The Asmodean crystal exposes how selfish they both were in chasing connection. Asmodeus himself says it best.
Lust shouldn't be about force. It's an art to be earned and enjoyed. It's all about that journey to Pleasure Town.
It's no wonder why he designed the crystal in this way. While it is true that Stolas recognized the power disparity that he had with Blitz by giving him the crystal, he wasn't quite understanding the full picture of the situation like he thought he did. Despite doing it to get out of the transactional affair they were in, Stolas was still unintentionally reinforcing a transaction subtly by controlling the outcome of their relationship. He was mincing his words in a certain order that dictated the terms of how he would like Blitz to communicate there on out. It was this outcome or that outcome, nothing else. The emphasis on what's given in a tangible form still centers around transactional thinking. Stolas thought he was giving Blitz some power back, and yet he still walked away instead of letting Blitz take the time to process what was going on. Then jumped in with some dumb conclusions because things didn't turn out the way he wanted them to.
Blitz, I think so very highly of you. I didn't realize you think so low of me.
The reason why Stolas' conclusions are so stupid is because he has a different definition of what it means to be thought of highly by someone. Stolas is used to being judged by his wealth, status, and performance in his role as the Guetian prince. His assumption that Blitz's insults reflect low regard suggests that he sees his status with personal disdain. He thinks that Blitz calling him a pompous, rich asshole is thinking lowly of him, but it's really the opposite. Blitz looks at Stolas so highly that his assets are back in Truth Seekers has him climbing from the bottom just to get to Stolas' level. Golden stairs, chains, throne and all. Not to mention, Blitz is blatantly shown to be very insecure of himself that he thinks someone as top tier as Stolas can't love someone like him. But to give the guy some slack, Stolas doesn't know that Blitz thinks of him in this way, so he assumed the worst immediately. It reveals Stolas' struggle to connect with people who aren't bound by the same metrics of status and power. This misinterpretation stems from a deeper lack of self-awareness about his worth outside his societal role. This has negatively impacted how both Blitz and Stolas made their decisions, and both have tried to compete for control in their relationship as a result of how they see each other. What's interesting is that Blitz's self-reliance and tendency to push people away creates a unique kind of imbalance with Stolas as well. For all my talking of Stolas having more power between them, I should still acknowledge that Blitz has an emotional grip on Stolas that he doesn't realize. Stolas is lovesick, so lovesick in fact that he throws everything away for Blitz. He has tied his sense of self-worth to Blitz's perception of him. I'm sure Stolas thinks his feelings are a genuine reflection of his love, that he values Blitz more than his status or reputation. Despite still hiding away when he gets called out during Aussies, it feels more like Stolas' sense of desperation to escape his unfulfilling life and cling to the one person who makes him feel alive. But Blitz isn't in a place to offer the same level of commitment until much, much later. Both of them have a kind of control with each other that they don't realize until it falls apart. Being unable to accept what happened in full moon, they both went back to their self-destructive habits, again, in an attempt to cope with the fact that they lost each other. Ultimately, however, there will always be things outside of their control, things that will always be bigger than them they won't have any power in. Mastermind showcases this. Blitz or Stolas had no choice but to surrender to Satan. Satan himself is the embodiment of control in hell. His sin, being wrath or anger by nature, are emotions that attempt to make us feel the need to control our frustrations when things don't go the way we want or expect. What highlights control in the episode is when Stolas thinks about being the mastermind. He acknowledges and becomes a bit more self-aware that he is responsible for his actions. He's the one who makes his choices, a contrast to how he felt helpless in the system he was trapped in before. He is not in control of the court situation, he can't control his potential execution. But he can at least accept that it is out of his control and whatever happens, happens. It was a start in letting go for him, and his powers getting revoked would only make him learn that lesson even more. Stolas becomes free of the system he felt so trapped in, but also loses his forms of control in the process. Which makes me wonder, did Stolas subconsciously want to destroy the structure of his privilege? He was already at a low point after severing his ties with Blitz, so it almost kind of feels like he was ready to give it all up before he even knew about the trial. Sure, I believe he was stalling for time during the trial but found no way out, so he threw it all away. He no longer has powers and wealth, but he can learn to love without needing to exert control anymore. Not when he doesn't have the ability to do that to Blitz like he used to. For Blitz, where the golden chains pulled him towards Stolas, now it was pulling him away. Where the feathers led to his tumultuous death, now it flows when his life is being returned. What he thought was entrapment turned out to be what liberates him, and he knows this. Blitz can rest slightly easier when he figures that he doesn't have to be the protector all the time. He doesn't see being saved as a sign of vulnerability or weakness and instead sees it as a sign of competence. To be fair, he's shown time and time again by Millie and Stolas that he can be the one who needs rescuing, and it is okay to rely on others too. He doesn't feel the need to control Stolas or pressure him in any way, and instead shows love and compassion after his life was saved. We start to really see him letting go of control and just doing good things for each other because they can, with no end goal or idealistic narrative in mind. Stolas accepts his consequences rather than fall back on it, accepting that Octavia shunning him out is out of his control. Earlier, we see Stolas usually making Octavia do things she doesn't want to do. Here, he can't do anything and he just has to accept that. Blitz expresses some guilt about how Stolas did so much for him, but Stolas rightfully doesn't let him keep that thought. He doesn't blame Blitz for things outside of his control and takes full responsibility for everything that has led to where they are. When Stolas asks Blitz that he doesn't have to stay with him, it is him finally letting Blitz do his own thing. The old Stolas would have looked for excuses to make him stay, to make that fit the kind of lovey-dovey romantic narrative he has in his head. Now he is respecting his emotional boundaries, and Blitz no longer forced to oblige with any transactional demands or golden chains around his neck. Stays. He is acting with much more care and lowering his walls. The dance they both had at the end of Sinsmas, as Stolas says it, would look ridiculous to any outsider. But they don't care. They don't need to care about anyone or anything outside of their control. They can just be happy even for a little while. Stolas may still have some lingering unhappiness from everything that's happened, but he accepts that this is the way things are now. Unpredictable as this new life may be, at least he isn't alone. He has Blitz now. Stolas still needs to make some friends and build a life outside of Blitz, but with the upper class life no longer holding him back, it's a start. It's not perfect like the fantasies he had before, but it is still true love. Stolas and Blitz have both unintentionally hurt each other because of their own personal unhealed issues. Stolas made Blitz feel objectified, while Blitz's tendency to lash out have repeatedly pushed Stolas away even when Stolas tries to show genuine care. Blitz's actions can come across as a deliberate rejection rather than a cry for help. He and Stolas' journey towards forgiveness requires both of them to acknowledge how they've hurt each other. Without self-forgiveness, their relationship remains fragile, as they're unable to offer each other the full vulnerability and trust they need. It's a two-way street. This is something that the show has yet to address, and I'm hoping they do in the future. Instead of one big moment of reconciliation, the writing could portray smaller incremental steps where both of them gently learn to trust and forgive each other. Give us more of this! I've always disliked slow burns with how excruciatingly draggy they are, without adding anything meaningful to stories. They always end the same way. The will they won't they pairing in question always end up together by the time a show ends. I've always believed that it's better and saves a lot of time or hassle to just let people enjoy how cute couples can be when they're together instead of cramming them into the last minute. The one exception I can apply where this trope actually works is for Stolitz. People often forget that relationships are just a start, and it's not necessarily a smooth sailing happily ever after path after that. Unlike most slow burn couples in the media, Stolitz got together halfway through the show, and we still have 2 more seasons to go. 2 more seasons of seeing them work as a couple. I can't wait for that. And unlike most shows, Stolitz actually had a reason for being so slow burn to begin with. Many slow burns focus on keeping the couple apart without giving meaningful reasons for the delay. In contrast, Stolitz's pacing is deeply tied to the character's personal growths rather than just slow burn for the sake of slow burn. I know a lot of people argue that the writers had to work under restrictions when it came to writing gay couples back then, but they also still see a lot of the slow burn trope with straight couples in the media. I also need to emphasize that there were cartoons back in the 2000s that were surprisingly progressive as a representation of gay couples. And I think we need to hold up those standards and raise the bar a little higher the next time we try to paint gay characters as revolutionary. That's where Helluva Boss really shines in being an indie show. They can just do whatever they want without some higher up middling. It's easy to say that Blitz and Stolas can just talk through their problems in 10 minutes, but as we've already seen unfold in the show, these two don't even know how to communicate. Communication requires vulnerability and self-awareness, both of which their trauma actively works against. Blitz can't trust others to stay, and Stolas can't see past his own fantasies to truly listen. It's fascinating to see two heavily traumatized people wanting love, but can't because of their shortcomings and bad coping mechanisms. These solutions will seem obvious to most normal, healthy, functioning people, but when you go through a lifetime of being abused and manipulated, your outlook in life changes. The media typically brushes over how trauma can warp our perceptions and how strongly we feel about certain things as a result. For instance, if you recognize that you were abused as a child, you probably hold strong opinions on protecting children from abuse. Perception as aspect of trauma is majorly shown through Blitz, where he's often shown holding strong opinions on things like Hell's oppressive structures or his love for his daughter Luna, or when he chooses not to kill the happy family in Sinsmas. He thinks and holds perspectives that a traumatized person does. And this is the heart of Stolitz. Everything they want is right there, but past experiences and habits they've been doing, up to a point that has gotten them this far, will be hard to denounce since those habits are all they've ever known. It doesn't help that hell is specifically structured to reinforce those bad habits and prolong suffering, with all its corruption and vices proudly at full display. There is comfort in things that are familiar to Blitz and Stolas, even if those things are harmful. All their choices and need for control stem from trauma, with Blitz knowing what it's like to have everything taken away from him on a whim, and Stolas indulging himself in distractions just to be able to get by the system he's trapped in. Healing from trauma in a relationship is incredibly hard because it requires individual growth and mutual effort. It also means letting parts of yourself go, and that fear can hold anyone back. It's why some people don't take their medications because it feels so wrong to not be in the dark that they are used to, and have claimed as part of who they are. The implicit message is that while trauma is part of us, it shapes us, it also doesn't define us entirely. There is more to us than just what happened. Blitz and Stolas' relationship can only work if they both confront their demons, not for each other, but for themselves. It's not true about what people say that you can't love others if you don't love yourself first, but not loving yourself would mean it would be hard for you to accept love. Part of healing may involve redefining what love means to them. For Blitz, it means seeing love as something he deserves, not something he has to earn. For Stolas, it means moving beyond fantasy and embracing love as a partnership rather than an escape. Part of media analysis is not only understanding the intent and message the writers are trying to convey, but also taking into account how that piece of media affects or associates itself with the viewer. It's important to think critically of what we can consume and reflect on it, asking why it impacts us, how it impacts us, and what we can do moving forward. When characters resonate deeply with viewers, the creators have a certain responsibility to handle their arcs thoughtfully. Not everything has to be deep, but to those who find something meaningful in the things they consume is something still worth discussing about. Stolitz resonates with so many people because feeling unworthy of love, craving connection, or wanting redemption are universal things. There is a place and time for happy and less dramatic relationships at the same time within the show. I know we don't always have to relate to characters for them to be good, but it works in Stolitz's favor. We can appreciate Stolitz as a flawed relationship without condoning its toxicity. It's a way of engaging with fiction that allows for catharsis and exploration of difficult emotions. A lot of us are trying to find connection in a broken world where relationships are inherently messy and selfishness is the norm. It's normal for people to project themselves on characters, and everyone will have different experiences. The important thing is that it shouldn't be done in excess. AKA, don't do Stolas. I became sorely attached to Helluva Boss when they explored Blitz's drama, and my girlfriend in turn to Stolas. Blitz is a character I heavily resonate with from the way he copes and reacts, along with how similar he treats his relationships and the kind of dynamics he has created within said relationships. I know what it's like to tip people off the edge to justify my cutting them off once they start acting aggressively to me afterwards. I know what it's like to be the kind of person our societal systems look down upon or deprive of opportunities. And I most definitely know what it's like to want to be better, but just don't have the guidance or the tools on how. It's common to just tell someone to go to therapy, but not everyone can just go to therapy. Not everyone can afford to or have the opportunity to go. Self-journey itself is something your therapist can't do for you either, and it's one you have to take active action for yourself, which takes a lifetime. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to therapy, but rather you have to understand that if you can, therapy takes effort on your part. Watching Blitz go through his own struggles, even fall back to square one, but still slowly become a little better as a person each time is cathartic. It's not uncommon to go back into self-destructive behavior because healing isn't linear and often involves setbacks. Remember to be kind but firm to yourself when this happens to you too. On another standpoint, I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with Helluva Boss' themes of oppression. So many of us dread that we are going to work forever without the net of financial security. The way Blitz deals with his financial instability can be seen as symbolic of the struggles many people face in a system that favors the wealthy. He's constantly hustling, scraping by, and making unethical decisions to survive. This gives him an edge, but also isolates him, which mirrors the experience of those who feel stuck in low-income jobs or insecure work environments, always on the brink of collapse. As cartoonishly exaggerated Helluva Boss is, it presents some very real problems for its target audience. We are navigating through a world where opportunities are scarce and expectations are high. On my girlfriend's end, she related to Stolas for his conflict avoidance personality. He wanted love that he never got to have. His life was set in stone from the very beginning that he made no proper decisions of his own. There's so much pressure involved with that too. My girlfriend said that it requires so much masking that I can't even do. She has a job that provides more stability but makes her want to,
Let me die.
Stolas, though he is wealthy, is powerless in his own way. His wealth doesn't afford him freedom, it keeps him tied to a toxic, oppressive system that controls him too. When he deviated from conformity, he was punished for it. Both Stolas and Blitz are under the hands of two-faced capitalism. Blitz was the opposite of all that high society nonsense. His life was so chaotic and unpredictable. Blitz did whatever the hell he wanted, when he wanted it, despite being burdened by so much insecurity. That made him a beacon of light. He wasn't just Stolas' light, but Millie's, and now to the rest of mankind. My girlfriend and I have been working through a lot in our relationship, and Stolitz has been helping us reflect on ourselves and areas we could work on. It was almost uncanny how similar our relationship problems were with Blitz's and Stolas' relationship, with the racial and wealth disparity we had coming from different backgrounds. I often struggled with the pressure to measure up to my girlfriend while she felt trapped. Our struggles are both valid, and it's not meant to be a dick measuring contest of who has it worse. Stolitz shows how class differences can complicate relationships, but that empathizing and respecting each other's different backgrounds can make it work. While Stolas initially uses his powers in ways that objectify Blitz, he learns to approach the relationship more respectfully over time. This is a reminder that navigating differences isn't just about communication, but also about respecting when and how your partner chooses to share their vulnerabilities. Sure, my girlfriend may not always understand my culture and vice versa. But we can be considerate of it provided it's not harmful, and validate each other's different but still difficult upbringings. And it seems that it's also that way for a lot of people, how Helluva Boss's characters make them feel represented. The show helps us to articulate feelings and challenges that might otherwise be difficult to put into words. Now, Helluva Boss does have some valid criticisms with the way it has handled Stolitz. I won't sugarcoat it, the transaction they had is questionable and even gross. Like yes, Blitz has the ability to push back and assert his boundaries, even if he ultimately engages in the transactional agreement with Stolas. But he isn't truly free to leave the relationship without risking his business. While Blitz wasn't outright forced, the circumstances made it difficult for him to say no, which complicates the idea of him having true agency. But Blitz himself was also exploiting Stolas, albeit to a lesser degree, by stealing the book and manipulating him into bed. Blitz and Stolas' relationship becoming genuinely loving without addressing the exploitative foundation risks romanticizing the idea that coercive beginnings can lead to healthy relationships. This sends the harmful message that it's acceptable to stay in or forget those dynamics because they might eventually turn into love. Love also shouldn't justify or erase harmful behaviors, but here's the thing. Stolas has taken accountability for his actions, and the show has never glorified his actions in the past as a good thing. It has critiqued it. Neither does it do the same for Blitz, although Blitz still needs to take accountability for stealing the book in the first place. While his actions were born out of desperation and survival in the world, they still represent a form of manipulation that cannot be overlooked. The fandom being divided and either siding with Stolas or Blitz lies on where their personal privilege and experience with it lies. And most people can relate to Blitz on the middle class spectrum. This is why we've focused more on Stolas' exploitation and less on Blitz's. Since one could argue that Blitz is akin to a poor man selling bread to feed his family. We sympathize more with him because of his eat the rich mentality. I'm hoping that's the message it gets across for the adults, keyword, adults watching it. There's a reason why the show was intended for a mature audience, not just because it's edgy and is swearing in it, but because it tackles topics only adults can understand and can't be discussed with children. Divorce, affairs, poverty are messy topics adults deal with and understand that it's not as binary as presented. I believe that the writing is intending for us to take apart Stolas and Blitz's characters in particular and decide for ourselves critically if they're people worth forgiving. Octavia or Barbie didn't forgive them after all. What's great about Helluva Boss is that its stakes can be more personal and grounded, so a lot of the questionable characters like Blitz or Stolas aren't what we would consider far from forgiveness in their personal lives. They're still bad people, of course, they kill, but that's aside the focus of the story. They're stuck in hell and they might as well make the best of it. Just like what Veronica said, hell isn't an excuse for bad behavior that still directly impacts the people around you. For Blitz, having his life saved by Stolas, that was more than enough for him to move past what they had before. And that's the one who was mostly exploited in that transaction. He reserves the right to have his say on it. Another point of contention is how its humor conflicts with how themes are handled in the show. But it also works in its favor when it's done in service of the narrative, such as the I will not shut up about the scene. It is big comedy. And the reason why it works so well is because this scene right here is what all that buildup of us trying to make Stolas eat his consequences has finally led to. The writing shines when it lets us process what's going on just enough for it to move over to the next scene. But the tonal whiplash can be so jarring on a writing and narrative standpoint. Like, we went from an unserious murder show to an intensely personal love story. While some say that fans stopped watching Helluva Boss because of long hiatuses, it's really more because the show changed course that it became something that no longer appealed to some of its original audience. I think the show would have benefited being serialized from the very beginning instead of being framed like it was going to be episodic forever. A lot of shows do this nowadays and it is pretty annoying, especially when Stolitz was a relatively recent concept that was slotted into the story. This is why the latter half of the show feels like fanfiction, because it meant that everything else had to be adjusted in order to keep the shipping. That's what fanfics do. Heck, when the pilot first came out, Stolas was originally meant to be a villain. Even his designer flexed that, with the series later changing him from wearing a waist belt to a romper, to lighting him in much colder colors. While we don't know how the series would have gone if it stayed episodic and then serious, I do think it was always intended for the show to go on a much more dramatic route. Helluva Boss is largely inspired by BoJack Horseman, which is Vivsy's favorite show. I haven't come around to watching BoJack yet, but from what people tell me, it's mostly a lot of misery, so it's not a surprise for Helluva Boss to be going that direction. Stolitz was pitched into production because Vivsy thought it would be cute. And despite stemming from that seemingly simplistic premise, it gave the characters a lot of complicated substance that Vivsy aimed for since the beginning. Stolitz definitely gave us an exploration of how a will they won't they can be a decent, albeit frustrating trope. But it is meant to be frustrating. It is meant for us to empathize with characters who are so dysfunctional that they don't know how to solve simple problems just by communicating, don't know how to process their inner turmoil. And the series still lets us see how they have to take responsibility for their actions, how despite being traumatized, they aren't going to be babied and have to face their own consequences. Their connection is believable, even if messy. Love will not cure them, but it can motivate them to grow as better people. We can criticize the characters, the show, the writing, while still empathizing with and liking it. But I totally get that just because something is realistic doesn't mean it is a masterpiece to watch. So people are valid in opting out of the show for feeling like its attempts at being serious are handled clumsily. It makes sense that people criticize Stolitz for being toxic, but by the end of the day, they're still people. Just like us. Though there are people who certainly ship Stolitz for other reasons, most people like myself ship and root for them together because they represent us. They represent our struggles, how life can go so wrong, how relationships are messy, and what it means to be in love when you have a lot of baggage with you. But we know Blitz and Stolas deserve love. It comes with the hope that while they have a lot of things to work on themselves, they can heal with time. That being damaged doesn't mean we are unlovable. We are all very flawed, very messed up deep down, and we don't always like acknowledging that part of us. But even we are worthy of love.
I always thought I might be bad. Now I'm sure that it's true. 'Cause I think you're so good, and I'm nothing like you. Look at you go, I just adore you. I wish that I knew what makes you think I'm so special. If I could begin to do something that does right by you, I would do about anything. I would even learn how to love